There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, and only one way to live long enough to regret it. That way is to see too much. Among the billions of worlds under the Emperor's light, there was one unlike any other. Prospero, the shining jewel of forbidden wisdom, the world of the thousand suns, and home to one of the most brilliant minds ever birthed by humanity, Magnus the Red. He stood taller than any mortal man, his flesh a living paradox of power and grace. His crimson skin glimmered like molten glass beneath Prospero's twin suns. His single great eye shimmered with impossible color, a gaze that saw not only the material realm but the shifting patterns of fate itself. Magnus was not merely a general, nor merely a scholar. He was a Primarch, one of the 20 godlike sons crafted by the Emperor of mankind to bring order to the galaxy. But while his brothers embodied war, conquest, and fury, Magnus embodied something rarer, more dangerous: curiosity. He was the mind that dared to ask why when others were content to obey, and for that he was both blessed and cursed. Prospero was a city of enlightenment in an age of endless darkness. Marble towers rose into the thin atmosphere like spires of thought itself, each one humming with psitic wards and shimmering with knowledge too perilous for other worlds to even name. Here, the Thousand Suns Legion studied what others feared: the arts of the warp, the mysteries of souls, and the power of thought turned into reality. To outsiders, they were heretics in gilded armor. To themselves, they were guardians of enlightenment, soldiers of the mind as much as of the blade. Magnus moved through the grand halls of the Pyramid of Photep, his towering form casting long shadows across mosaics depicting humanity's triumph over ignorance. Around him, psychers whispered incantations and data psalms, their eyes glowing faintly blue as they communed with the unseen. At his side walked Ahriman, his most gifted and most dangerous son, chief librarian, architect of the great library, and the man who would one day carry the burden of his father's sins. "The warp murmurs again, father," Ahriman said, voice low and measured. "The tides shift more violently than before. The astropath's report screams across the void." Magnus smiled faintly, that strange, tragic smile that came so easily to him. "The warp always screams, my son. It is a storm, not of weather but of thought. Every death, every prayer, every hope of mankind adds to its thunder." He paused before a great window overlooking Tizca, the capital of Prospero. The city shimmered, streets lined with crystalline structures that refracted the light of both suns, creating rivers of color across the horizon. "But tell me, Ahriman, have you ever seen a storm that did not pass?" The chief librarian hesitated. "I have seen storms that only grew worse, my lord." Magnus turned, the reflection of both suns burning in his single eye. "Then we shall learn to ride it." To the Thousand Suns, knowledge was salvation. To the rest of the Imperium, knowledge was temptation. Magnus had heard the edicts, the Emperor's decree forbidding the use of psychic sorcery, the Edict of Nicaea that declared the warp a tool too dangerous to wield. But Magnus had seen deeper. He knew that the Emperor himself drew power from that same sea of souls. He knew that ignorance, not knowledge, was the true enemy of mankind. And above all, he loved humanity too much to let it destroy itself through fear. That night, beneath the 3 moons of Prospero, Magnus sat alone in the chamber of reflection, an impossible sphere where no sound could escape, no thought could intrude. His mind reached outward, threading through the currents of the warp. Each thought became a star, each breath a ripple of light. He touched memories of his creation in the gene laboratories beneath Terra, of the Emperor's voice calling his name, of the brothers he had once known, Robout's discipline, Horus's charm, Russ's rage, and behind them all, the cold, unblinking brilliance of their father. The Emperor had loved them, of that Magnus was certain, but his love was conditional, structured, measured. His was not. His love was chaos in its purest form, selfless, desperate, consuming. He would burn a world to save a soul. "Father," he whispered into the emptiness, "I see the threads of your great work. I see the webway, the golden lattice beneath the palace. You seek to bring humanity beyond the reach of chaos, but the storm grows." The air shimmered. For a heartbeat, Magnus felt something, a presence vast and unyielding, a consciousness that dwarfed even his own. The Emperor. The contact was brief, a flicker, a warning, and then silence. Magnus withdrew, shaken. His heart, if such a being could be said to have one, clenched with unease. Why had his father turned away? Why had he forbidden what he knew could save them all? He closed his eye and reached deeper, not to the Emperor, but into the warp itself. There, whispers coiled like smoke, voices of unseen beings offering power, promising truth. He pushed them aside. He was Magnus the Red, master of the unseen. He bowed to no demon, no god. But even as he dismissed them, a fragment of one voice lingered. It was soft, melodic, almost kind. "Love too deeply, and you will bleed forever." Magnus shuddered. He did not know then that it was the voice of Tzeentch, the architect of fate, who had been watching him since birth. The next morning, Magnus gathered his captains within the Hall of Convergence, a cathedral of silver light where psychic echoes hung like incense. "Brothers," he said, voice resonating with power that needed no amplifier. "The Imperium rots beneath its own ignorance. Our Father hides truths too vast for mortal minds, truths that only we can bear. We must prepare. The warp stirs. Something terrible comes." Ahriman nodded gravely. Others murmured agreement, their faith in Magnus absolute. But deep among them, whispers of doubt stirred. The first sign came not from the heavens, but from the silence between them. Across the star systems of Prospero's dominion, astropaths began to weep blood. Vox traffic fell into static, dreams turned violent. Every psychic choir reported the same phenomenon, a pulse in the warp. Not random, not natural, but rhythmic, deliberate, intelligent. Magnus felt it before any instrument could record it, like a heart beating somewhere beneath reality, slow, mournful, inevitable. He stood at the apex of the pyramid of Photep, eyes closed, the night wind howling around him. The psychic storm raged unseen, but he could feel it pressing against the edge of his mind like an ocean of knives. Ahriman approached from behind, hesitant. "The disturbance grows stronger, my lord. Our navigators cannot chart even the nearest systems. The Astronomicon's light flickers." Magnus's eye opened. Then the Emperor himself feels it. "The warp is crying out, warning us." Ahriman's tone was cautious, or deceiving us. The Primarch smiled faintly, and for a heartbeat he looked tired, a scholar far too old for his own brilliance. "You mistake the warp for a liar, my son. It tells truth in its own tongue. It is we who cannot yet translate its sorrow.
Below them, the city of Tizca shimmered beneath twin moons, its streets alive with the hum of psychic resonance. Statues of scholars and soldiers lined the broad avenues, their eyes turned skyward as though awaiting revelation. To most, Prospero was paradise. To Magnus, it was a monastery built atop a volcano. He turned his gaze toward the stars, or where the stars should have been. The void above was restless, thick with psychic interference, even the light bent uneasily. Something vast stirs beyond the veil, something older than the Imperium, and it moves toward Terra. Ahriman frowned. Toward our father? Magnus nodded. A shadow in the warp. I cannot name it, but I can feel its hunger. He paused, voice softening. I will not let him fall unguarded.
The warp's pulse deepened, like a living drumbeat echoing through his skull. Each throb sent waves of nausea through the psychers of Prospero. Some clawed their faces raw in madness. Others screamed the Emperor's name until their throats bled. Magnus could not sleep. Not because of fear, but because the dreams had begun to whisper his father's name. Magnus, my son, he is in danger. The voice was faint, fractured, like light through broken glass, but unmistakable. It was him, the Emperor. Magnus rose from his meditation couch and strode through the halls of the Pyramid of Photep. The bronze doors opened before him in silent reverence, and the air shimmered with psionic tension. At the summit chamber, 12 of his chief sorcerers awaited him in a circle of firelight, Ahriman among them, his face drawn and pale. "You summoned us, Father of the Legion," Ahriman asked. Magnus's single eye burned like an ember. The Emperor calls for help. His project upon Terra is under siege. I can hear his cry through the warp. There was silence, heavy as the void. The others dared not speak. They all knew what he was about to suggest and what it meant. "My lord," Ahriman begged carefully, "you forbade such contact, the Edict of Nicaea." Magnus's voice cut through the air like lightning. The edict was meant to protect the Imperium. If our father falls, there will be nothing left to protect. He stepped into the circle, runes ignited beneath his feet. The chamber darkened as if the stars themselves bowed to his will. If the Emperor bleeds, then I will bleed for him. With that, he began the ritual. The warp did not open. It screamed. Reality buckled. The walls of the pyramid shuddered as invisible talons raked across them. The psychers of Prospero fell to their knees, blood pouring from their eyes and ears. The smell of ozone filled the chamber, mingled with the stink of fear. Magnus floated above the circle, body trembling with power. His mind extended, beyond Prospero, beyond the segmentum, across light years and aeons. He saw Terra, the cradle of mankind, wreathed in golden light. At its heart, the Emperor stood at his great project, the secret web of the Webway Gate. But then, Magnus saw something else, a shadow, vast and unnameable, coiling around the Emperor's light like a serpent of eternity. It was hunger made manifest, and it turned its gaze toward Magnus. "Ah, the son who looks too closely." The voice was ancient, cold and impossibly vast. It spoke in every language and none. Magnus tried to turn away, but the gaze pierced every defense, every barrier, every secret of his soul. "You seek to save him," it whispered. "Then break the gate. Let me in. Only through destruction comes truth." "No!" Magnus roared, his psychic wards blazing bright. But the warp is not a battlefield. It is a mirror, and what it shows cannot be unseen.
Magnus reached toward the Emperor, desperate. "Father, you are in danger. Let me—" In that instant, his power touched the Emperor's psychic shield, and the universe itself convulsed. The webway gate beneath the Imperial Palace shattered. What had been meant as a conduit of divine order became a wound in reality, through which the demons of the warp poured screaming into the material realm. Golden light bled red, the Emperor's mighty wards flared, then dimmed. On Prospero, the explosion of psychic energy hurled Magnus to the ground. His sorcerers lay broken or dead. The sky above Tisca ignited with auroras of crimson and black, and every soul on the planet felt their Primarch's scream echo through their bones. When Magnus awoke, the stars were wrong. He lay in the ruins of his sanctum, his flesh still glowing faintly with warp burn. Araman knelt beside him, shaken but alive. "My lord," Araman whispered, trembling, "what have you done?" Magnus sat upright slowly. His psychic senses reached outward and recoiled in horror. Across the void, Terra was silent. The Emperor's presence, once radiant and omnipresent, now flickered like a dying flame. "No," Magnus whispered. "I tried to warn him. I tried to save him. But the warp does not distinguish between love and pride." From the ether, laughter began to echo, low, cruel, and intimate, the same voice that had spoken before. "And so it begins, the father's pride, the son's love, both blind, both doomed. You have opened the door, Magnus the Red, and I am already walking through." He screamed, not in rage but in grief, for in his heart he understood the truth. His father was alive but wounded beyond healing. The Emperor's throne would become a prison, his empire a tomb, and his children, all of them pawns of a cosmic tragedy written long before any of them were born. Araman reached for him, but Magnus pushed his hand away, staring into the storm above Prospero. "I have damned us all because I loved him too much." And from the warp, the gods of chaos laughed, not at his folly, but at the beauty of it, for love, they knew, was the most exquisite kind of destruction.
At first, the people of Tisca thought it was dawn, a new sun rising over the horizon. But the light grew red, then black, and then the heavens themselves split open. From the rift poured the Volca Fenrica, the space wolves, sons of Lemon Russ, sent to bring judgment. Prospero's towers shimmered like glass spires, beautiful and doomed, and above them the sky burned with the fury of the All-Father. When Magnus opened his eye that morning, he already knew what was coming. He had seen it in the warp, his father's anguish, Rus's rage, and the decree that would forever change the face of the Imperium. Prospero will burn. Araman stood beside him in silence, watching the enemy fleet enter orbit. The runes of warning flared across every psychic relay. The air trembled under the thunder of descent engines. The wolves had come not as brothers, but as executioners. Magnus said nothing for a long time. His gaze lingered on the distant horizon, where the first streaks of flame marked the drop pod's entry. Araman finally spoke. "Do we fight?" Magnus's voice was quiet, weary. "Would you have us kill our brothers, Azek? Would you have me defy my father again?" "He sent them to destroy us," Araman hissed. "What choice do we have?" Magnus turned toward him, his single eye glowing like molten glass. "The choice to remember who we are. We are the sons of knowledge, not slaughter." But even as he said it, the ground trembled with the impact of 1,000 drop pods, and the howl of the wolves split the air. The burning of Prospero had begun. The space wolves descended like a storm unleashed by the gods themselves. Their drop pods crashed into the golden streets, scattering psychic dust and blood in equal measure. Civilians fled into the shimmering temples, but nowhere was safe. The wolves roared their war chants, guttural hymns of Fenris, as bolters sped death and flame. Magnus's warriors, the Thousand Sons, met them with psychic fire. Bolts of energy tore through the invaders, melting armor and flesh. But for every wolf that fell, 3 more took his place. The air itself screamed with the clash of faith and reason, of fang and flame. From orbit, Layman Russ himself watched through the red haze, his face set like carved stone. Magnus's brother, his friend once, his executioner now. "You've done this to yourself, brother, you and your damned sorcery." He gave the order, and the fury of the Wolf King fell upon Prospero. Magnus stood alone in the hall of the pyramid, watching as flames devoured his city. The psychic wards that once shielded Prospero flickered and died one by one. Through the warp, he could feel every scream, every dying thought, every pleading soul, and it was breaking him. He fell to his knees, the marble floor cracked beneath his hand, his psychic aura flickering like a dying star. "Father," he whispered into the void, "why have you forsaken me?" There was no answer, only silence and the faint echo of laughter from the warp. Ahriman stumbled into the hall, armor scorched, blood on his lips. "We can still fight. Let us stand together, my lord." Magnus rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "Fight? Against whom? Against Russ? Against our father? Against destiny itself?" "The wolves are killing our brothers," Ahriman cried. "Prospero burns." Magnus turned away, eyes glimmering with tears of light. "Then let it burn. Perhaps the fire will purify what I have defiled." The hall trembled again. From outside came the crash of bolter shells and the bellow of dreadnoughts. The wolves were closing in. Magnus extended the hand and opened a portal, a psychic gate into the immaterial. The air rippled and bent like glass. "Go, Azik. Lead our people. Save what knowledge you can. This world is lost." Ahriman hesitated, his voice breaking. "And you?" Magnus smiled, not in joy, but in resignation. "I will face my brother." They met amid the ruins of the Temple of the Serpent, where once scholars debated the stars. Now it was a graveyard of ash and blood. Layman Russ strode through the fire, his massive frame silhouetted by the flames, his armor smeared with soot and blood. In his hand was the weapon of judgment, the blade of the Wolf King. "Magnus, you've doomed us all." Magnus stood tall, though his body trembled, his eye glowed with restrained fury and sorrow. "I sought only to save him, brother. I loved him." Russ spat. "You disobeyed him. You broke his law, tore a hole in reality, and unleashed hell on mankind." Magnus's voice cracked. "Would you have me done nothing while he suffered? Would you have me blind to his pain?" "There's always a choice," Russ said. "You made the wrong one." They clashed. The air exploded with force. Psychic fire met Fenris' fury. Magnus's sorcery tore through the battlefield, bending the earth itself. Russ countered with brute, unrelenting power, each swing of his blade a storm. For minutes or centuries they fought, brother against brother, reason against instinct, love against law. In the end, strength triumphed over sorrow. Russ drove his blade through Magnus's chest. The Primarch gasped, blood like liquid fire spilling onto the stones. His wings, once radiant, folded in ruin. Russ held him there, their faces inches apart. "You were my brother," he said. "You could have stood with us." Magnus smiled weakly. "And yet, even now, I do." With his last strength, he touched Russ's forehead, not with rage, but with forgiveness. Then he whispered, "Tell Father, I understand now." And his body broke, not into death, but into light. The warp swallowed him whole, carrying his shattered essence across the stars to a place no mortal could follow. Prospero burned for 7 days, and when the flames died, only dust and silence remained. The wolves left nothing but ruins, and the Imperium lost one of its brightest suns, not to hatred, but to love that burned too fiercely for the mortal world to contain.
The void is patient. It does not forget. It does not forgive. It waits. When Magnus fell, the warp did not release him. It cradled him, a tempestuous mother of smoke and fire, tearing and reforming him as the universe had never intended. Every fiber of his being was unmade, every thought stretched to the breaking point. He awoke in the planet of sorcerers, a world not born but created, a living extension of his own mind. The landscape shimmered with impossible geometry, mountains twisted like molten glass, rivers flowed with light, and the sky roared with 1,000 suns that existed nowhere but in thought. Here, Magnus was immortal. Here, the scars of Prospero burned in his memory, but his body and mind could no longer die. He rose from the ground, wings of psychic energy unfolding, larger than memory, brighter than fire. Around him, the air hummed with whispers, neither malevolent nor friendly, but powerful beyond comprehension. "You survived," said a voice from the shadows. "Yes," Magnus replied, voice deep and echoing across the alien mountains. "Because I must." The voice belonged to Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the architect of fate, a figure both terrifying and magnetic, constantly shifting form, speaking in tongues that were all simultaneously intelligible. "You have always sought knowledge, Magnus. You loved too deeply. You defied the Father, and now the universe offers you a new path." Magnus's gaze did not waver. "I seek no path that betrays him. I am a son of the Emperor. My heart remains loyal, though my flesh has been torn." Tzeentch smiled, a twisting expression that was both cruel and amused. Loyalty is relative in the Immaterium. The Imperium is fragile. The warp is eternal. You may yet become the instrument of your own salvation or your greatest curse.
Magnus looked down and saw them, the surviving 1,000 suns. Some were broken beyond recognition. Their psychic potential had surged beyond control, bodies fused with the raw currents of the warp. Others stood resolute, their eyes glowing like distant stars, ready to follow their father into damnation or salvation, whichever the universe demanded. "Brothers," Magnus said, voice ringing like a bell through the psychic winds. "We are not dead. Prospero is lost, but we endure. And in our endurance, we shall claim what they denied us: truth, knowledge, power." He raised a hand, and the landscape responded. Mountains shifted to form arenas, rivers twisted to form bridges, and the ground itself pulsed with psychic energy. The 1,000 suns knelt in reverence, not to fear, but to awe. Ahriman approached, cautious yet determined. "My lord, the warp phenomena we have absorbed from Prospero, it is not entirely under our control. If we push too far, we risk losing our very souls." Magnus's single eye glowed brighter than ever. "Then we will learn to master it. We are not weak. The Emperor may have condemned us, but the universe itself trembles at our potential." Time passed differently here. Centuries could be counted in seconds, and seconds stretched into eons. Magnus explored the planet of sorcerers with the meticulousness of a scholar and the hunger of a god. Every thought became matter, every emotion a current of energy. And always Tzeentch observed. The Lord of Change offered him secrets, forbidden techniques of warp manipulation, ways to twist fate itself. Magnus resisted at first, holding fast to his loyalty to the Emperor. Yet the pain of Prospero, The loss of his brothers, the betrayal by the wolves, it gnawed at his heart. "Love that burns too bright can ignite the cosmos," Tidzinch whispered. "You love too deeply, you grieve too truly. But what is grief if not the forge of power?" Magnus felt it, the pull, the seductive promise of knowledge that could prevent further suffering, the ability to undo what had been lost. His heart wavered, not because he desired corruption, but because he desired salvation. Slowly, inexorably, the barrier between loyalty and heresy began to fracture. The 1,000 Suns followed him into the heart of the planet, where the ground itself sang in resonance with Magnus's will. They trained relentlessly, their psychic gifts amplified to terrifying perfection. Ahriman watched with unease as his brothers became both more magnificent and more unstable. Psychic storms erupted at their fingertips. Fire and blood answered their thoughts without command. Yet Magnus led with care, guiding them as a teacher would a child, stern, brilliant, and utterly devoted. "You are not my soldiers," Magnus told them. "You are my sons, my mirrors, my legacy. I have failed to protect you once, never again." In the heart of the sorceress landscape, Magnus performed the first ritual sanctioned by Tidzinch, not as a worshipper, but as a student of the warp. A gateway to knowledge opened, and he glimpsed the threads of fate in ways no mortal or Primarch should. It was intoxicating and horrifying. "We are the 1,000 Suns," Magnus said, voice carrying across the psychic winds. "We are no longer Prospero's children. We are something new, something eternal." The world responded, reshaping itself around his words. The planet of sorcerers became a crucible, forging his legion into both scholars and sorcerers, a mirror of his own mind, brilliant, disciplined, and terrifying. Yet beneath the triumph lay a shadow. For every new skill mastered, a piece of their humanity faded. For every victory over the warp, a fragment of loyalty to the Empress slipped away. Magnus's love, so pure, so tragic, had guided them here, and it was only the beginning of their damnation. One night, standing on a cliff overlooking a river of fire and light, Magnus felt the first tangible whisper of corruption, a subtle distortion in the psychic currents. He reached for it, heart racing, and felt it coiling around his mind like a serpent. "You have the power to avert suffering," it hissed, "but only through change, only through sacrifice." He recoiled, then paused. He could feel the truth in it, not the promise of evil, but the inevitability of consequence. The path he had chosen, even for love, had led him here. He looked down at his legion, their eyes glowing in the dark like dying stars. They were safe, alive, more than he could have hoped for. "I will not fail again," he whispered, "no matter the cost." And the warp whispered back, 1,000 voices in harmony. "Then the next step is yours, and the universe will never forgive you." The crimson winds of the planet of sorcerers swept across his face. Magnus lifted his arms, wings of psychic energy unfurling. He was not yet lost, but the die had been cast. The universe trembled.
The skies above the planet of sorcerers shimmered with impossible colors, violet bleeding into crimson, gold twisting into black. It was the aura of a world shaped by thought, the heartbeat of a Primarch who had lived, died, and been reborn by the warp. Magnus rose above the alien peaks, wings of psychic energy unfurling like banners of fire. Below him, the 1,000 Suns moved with eerie perfection, a legion honed by knowledge, discipline, and the whispers of Tzeentch. They were brilliant, terrifying, and irrevocably changed. And yet, Magnus felt the ache in his heart, the weight of Prospero, the deaths of his brothers, the betrayal of the Emperor, and the lingering echo of love that had doomed them all. Even in isolation, the warp is never silent. Magnus saw worlds burning, worlds that might have been saved if not for his choice to reach beyond the edicts of the Emperor. He saw the flames of Prospero still smoldering in his mind, each ember a memory of innocence lost. He walked along a ridge, fingers trailing over rivers of light, and felt the currents of fate weaving themselves into patterns of inevitability. "I loved him," Magnus whispered, voice trembling. "I only wanted to save him, and yet I have destroyed more than I could ever know." The siege sorcerer appeared once more, shifting form into that of a tall, regal figure, both beautiful and grotesque. "You have walked the edge of eternity. You have touched truth and shattered it. Do you yet understand?" Magnus bowed his head. "I understand too much. Knowledge is a burden. Love is a blade. And yet, I will not turn away." The siege sorcerer's words hung in the air, vibrating with psychic force. His resolve was absolute. If the universe demanded sacrifice, he would give himself, body, mind, and soul. He turned to his legion. The 1,000 Sons had become both his mirrors and his children. Their eyes gleamed like stars, reflecting both power and the shadow of their shared past. "Brothers," Magnus said, voice carrying across psychic winds, "we are the legacy of Prospero, the heirs of knowledge and the sons of love that dared too much. The Imperium calls us heretics. The universe whispers of our doom. Let them come. Let them witness what love can create." Armin approached, hesitant. "My lord, the path you are about to walk, once fully embraced, there is no return. Even the Emperor cannot save you from what comes next." Magnus's single eye glowed, brighter than the suns above. "Then let us rise as we are meant to. We will not be bound by fear or law. We will be eternal, and in our eternity we shall wield the power to protect, even if it is misunderstood, even if it is hated, even if it destroys us." With that, he raised his hands and the world itself obeyed. Mountains shifted, rivers of fire and light converged, and the air hummed with raw psychic energy. The 1,000 Sons followed suit, channeling every fragment of their being into a singular titanic projection of power. The planet of sorcerers itself became a beacon, a lighthouse of psychic might visible across light years, bending the fabric of reality to announce, "We endure, we rise, we love." And yet, there was a cost. Every psychic surge frayed their humanity. Memories of Prospero, the warmth of the people, the gentle humor of lost brothers, all became distorted threads in a tapestry of raw power. Love, once a shield, now became a chain that bound them to fate. Magnus looked at the sky. He had tried to save his father, to prevent the tide of chaos from consuming the Imperium, and yet the warp had answered him in kind, offering power intertwined with damnation. "I have damned myself and my sons, and yet I will not turn back."
He felt the presence of his lost brothers, of the Emperor, and of the countless souls who had perished in the burning of Prospero. Their whispers were a chorus of grief, pride, and understanding. Magnus smiled faintly, accepting the weight of his love and failure. "Love is the greatest force in the universe," he said softly, "and the most destructive." Time lost meaning. Centuries passed like minutes. 1,000 Sons became legends whispered across the galaxy, their names cursed by the Imperium, admired by the warp. Magnus the Red stood eternal, a phoenix risen from the ashes of his past, wielding power and wisdom no mortal could comprehend. And yet, despite his ascent, the echo of Prospero's destruction remained. It was a wound to his soul, a reminder that even gods cannot undo the consequences of love too fierce, loyalty too absolute, and action too bold. "I am Magnus the Red," he declared, wings unfurling in a display of psychic grandeur. "I am the son who loved too deeply, and through that love I endure. I am teacher, protector, and exile. I am eternal." The planet pulsed in resonance with his declaration. Rivers of light danced, mountains shifted, and the very sky sang in colors beyond mortal comprehension. For Magnus and his sons, the path was clear: embrace their power, accept their exile, and wield their love as both weapon and shield in the dark millennium to come. The universe trembled at their might, and the warp whispered not with malice but with fascination. "The son who loved too deeply now walks among the gods." Magnus the Red rose from ruin not as a victim, but as a testament to the tragic beauty of devotion. He loved his father too deeply, trusted his brothers too fiercely, and sought knowledge too boldly. In doing so, he shattered Prospero, tore a wound in reality, and forged his legion anew in fire, blood, and the whispering winds of the warp. The Thousand Sons became both miracle and curse, immortal, brilliant, and irrevocably changed. They were the sons of love and loss, of knowledge and damnation. Every spell, every psychic surge, every thought of loyalty and devotion carried the weight of consequences that stretched across the stars. Yet despite all Magnus endured, he embodied the paradox of the 41st millennium. Love can save, love can destroy, and even the noblest intentions can become instruments of cosmic tragedy. His exile was not defeat, it was transformation. The galaxy may have judged him, the Emperor may have withheld favor, but Magnus's heart remained unbroken, his mind unyielding, his will eternal. In the darkness of the universe, a crimson light burned brighter than any star, a reminder that love, even when fatal, can leave echoes that endure beyond death itself.